Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Uncommon Sense. I'm Joshua Barnes. I'm the founder of Process Mentors, and I'll be one of the hosts today. I'm also joined by Al Shalloway and Steve Tendon. Steve, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, friends of Herbie. Well, I'm here as usual to represent the viewpoints of Herbie, who is always the constraint, the little guy who is overloaded and needs a lot of help. So, Joshua, you need to help me.
Well, I think this will be a good one for that because it'll help us look to see where challenges really are. I'm with the PMI now, Director for Thought Leadership at Agile at Scale Programs, and this is a favorite topic of mine, but glad Joshua's leading it.
All right, well, let's get right into it. So today's topic is where Agile transformations typically could start, and then some of the options that we're going to talk about. So guidance from leading Agile frameworks, countless consulting companies, always start at the team level. And they typically are going to select a pilot or two or some early adopter teams and get them going. And a little bit of progress is made. Management sees that. They want more and more coverage. And so off you go. You've got a lot of your delivery teams, oftentimes a lot of the IT areas that are the heart of what these Agile transformations focus is. And it's commonplace. I mean, I'm sure Al and Steve, when they chime in, I know myself, I've worked with a number of organizations over the years that's been the focus. But the question that we wanted to put out there is that the only way? Is that the best way? And can we expand our thinking and look at what are some of the other options or some of the other areas that we could start making some potential improvements in to have more success with our Agile adoptions? And so a little bit into that space, right? I typically come across two pretty common scenarios in the customers we work with. Now, one is they're taking a traditional approach. They want to adopt Agile. They're going to want to start with some teams. The next one is we might come in to do like an agility health check. Agile's been, at use for a while. Maybe there's some teams that have plateaued and they can be doing better. Maybe there's some teams that are taking more of a waterfall approach, right? That Wagile or that Scrum butt approach. And so again, a lot of times the focus is directly starting with the teams or trying to just make the teams become more efficient. But what if, and I'll ask those of you out there to kind of think about this for a moment, what if we're just making those teams more efficient and able to produce work that is quicker, right? Delivery of value quicker, but it's work of lesser importance, or it's just more work, but we're not really going to have an impact on the value we're delivering to the customer, right? So that's one of the things to just kind of get this going. So I'm going to give two examples of customer engagements where we were able to get some buy-in to start the transformation beyond just the team level. So if we think about, from a value stream perspective, going from an idea, a need from, one of our customers, something that a stakeholder, somebody in one of the lines of business has identified, and how we make a decision to flow that through, portfolio management and product management, and then, down to the delivery teams and maybe, out through operational support and hopefully making a positive impact to the customers. So one of the agility health checks that we did, we definitely came across something that's commonplace these days, right? Teams that were having challenges just in making more and more improvements in their way of working. And one of the things that we spotted that was a trend across many of the teams is that they had iteration leakage. They were constantly not able to get the work they were completing to coming out of iteration planning or sprint planning completed. And one of the biggest reasons, once we started to uncover it a little bit, and I guess we were kind of looking for that, is too much work being pushed onto the teams, right? So between stakeholders and managers, there was just this constant amount of work, whether it was, a small amount or sometimes a fairly large amount of work that was just being dumped onto these teams perpetually. So what we got buy-in to do is to start in the product management space, start in having a better intake management process so that those types of situations, the pushed work onto the teams was being eliminated, right? All the work needed to flow through the intake process. And so part of what we did was not only during the time period where we started to, shape up what they were going to do in their intake management side, but we were also putting capturing some data to show not only how much pushed work was occurring, but the cost of that pushed work, the work that wasn't getting done, or why there were, so many quality issues that constantly were coming about, right? All the detriments of having those types of scenarios. And so that was a very different type of transformation roadmap that the organization bought into and leadership approved than they were expecting, and also what is commonplace. And so the other one I'll talk about is one that we haven't got the necessary buy-in yet, although we're endeavoring every week to, and that is taking a look across the entire value stream. And I'll tie this back into the DAVSC program, in that we have a mechanism, a tool for doing assessments, and there are insights that we use to see how well something's being done in a particular area of the value stream. And if it's not being done, it might be not being done at all. It might be something that needs improvement or significant improvement. So we've done an assessment where we've identified candidate improvements across the majority of the value stream, and we're trying to now see how much potential change we could start to bring all the way across. So we're not just going to start with improving the intake management process. We're not going to just start with making an improvement in how the delivery teams are going to adopt Agile. Or we're not going to just start and looking at some of the automation we can bring from a DevOps perspective. We're trying to identify and shape up what would be possible and what we could build upon across the entire value stream. So we'll hopefully in a future one of these episodes, we'll talk about something like this again, and hopefully I'll have some positive news that yes, the company decided to move forward with that and provide some real world experience from that scenario. But that's the lead into today's topic. And although I could keep continuing to talk at this juncture, I want to hear from Al and Steve.
Well, I got some stories. And I'm going to give two little bits first before I tell you the story, because to me, it's kind of absurd to think you always have to start at the Agile, at the team level. I was about to say at the Agile Manifesto, because I've been saying for a very long time that the Agile Manifesto is overly focused on the team, mentioned 17, 18 times, management not mentioned, business mentioned a couple times, customer mentioned a couple times. And it was useful for when it started, but it also was started by a bunch of people, XP mostly, and Scrum folks, a few others, that were dealing with the team. So what we want to look at, if you think about that, this is the irony. If you go into new companies, you almost always think it's the team's fault. When you talk to leadership, oh yeah, the team's doing this, the teams don't know how to do that. And when you analyze it, you find they get the blame because they had it last. Whoever had the software last and is late last, that's whose fault it is. And the irony is, of course, they think that, and that's not right. But then again, we always say, well, let's fix the team. So that's kind of weird too. If we don't really believe it's who had it last is at fault, why are we always saying that's what we need to fix? So here's my story, though. Actually, one background for it. So I'm a big believer in systems thinking. And systems thinking is basically looking at the system as a whole, how the all pieces react to each other. And there's no question, you mentioned that this overloading teams has an impact on the teams. A lot of teams have problems because they're over capacity, they're not organized properly, and basically the impact on the teams is dramatic. And so when you think about it that way, it'd be natural to think maybe product management has something to do with it. But then one last thing, and this is the example. Systems thinking also tells us that the environment people are in has a lot of impact, more so even than on the individuals, like 95%, overwhelming amount. So back in 2012, I was doing a SAFE implementation. And in SAFE, they have essential SAFE, the team, and then you work up the different hierarchies, which I've actually never liked. It's gotten worse in my mind because you want to look at the value stream. And yeah, I know there's a value stream in there, but it's very hard to see with SAFE, and they don't build it that way. They do it from a hierarchical point of view. And we had a lot of people to train. We didn't have budget to train them. And I made a decision as the lead consultant that it would be easier to make sure the teams knew the environment they were in and not really do a great job on teaching them Scrum, which is what we're using. Now, I would like to have taught them a really good Scrum course, but in those days, SAFE Scrum training was pretty bad. They've improved it a lot. But I remember thinking, well, you know what? Giving them just the idea of what Scrum is will be okay, because they will understand why they have to do 2-week iterations. They will understand why they have to coordinate. And in fact, it worked quite well. And there was actually then a write-up. It was a case study, which there are other issues about it. And in fact, the case study SAFE wrote up ignored what I did, but I took a holistic view outside of the normal SAFE way of doing things. That was never mentioned in the write-up I've written up. I'll find the link I think I have a case study the way I wrote it up. But the point is, if you take a systems thinking point of view, and I'm sure Steve's going to bring in the theory of constraints point of view, so I will leave that out for the moment, then the environment people are in may be something to consider. And what do people really need to learn how to do Agile? When people start learning Scrum, if they don't understand the 2-week sprints, they don't understand other things, it's a lot harder. But if they say, oh, all of us are working so we can coordinate with each other, it gets easier. So the buy-in was tremendous. There was no resistance, even though nobody really understood Scrum at the start. And it was easier to teach them Scrum because they knew every 2 weeks they needed to get something done. So there wasn't this, oh, well, why do we have this? It was like, well, we understand because we're working together as the whole team. So I'll just leave it at that. Let Steve follow up because I know him well enough to know that.
So, Al, how could you possibly guess I would mention the theory of constraints?
I don't know.
I think I need to start mentioning that first. We'll just take the wind out of your sails, Steve.
Okay.
Well, I'm trying to be nice. Steve has deeper insights on TOC than me, so I wanted him to talk about it.
Okay, let's try. So, what would Herbie do? From where would Herbie start? Well, it's stated clearly in the 5 focusing steps. Step number 1 is identify the constraint. So that's where you start. Easy. But this only works if you do something before that. So there is like an unstated, if you wish, step 0. So before you go out and chase the constraint. And that is, well, define the goal. Where do you want to go? Where is the base camp? What is the heading, the direction to get there? So that is the fundamental thing. Start by being extremely clear on what is the goal. And I must also say something here that you must not confuse the goal with the purpose. The purpose has a much higher standing, and the purpose can be different from individual to individual. But the goal is something towards the organization as a whole, as a team, as a unit can tend to. So we have the notion of unity. I call it unity of purpose, but maybe it's more directed to the goal. All people are going in that same direction. And since they are going, there is this sense of movement, of flow. Well, that movement must be countable. So you can measure whether you're getting closer or not to this goal. If you have that in place and you have the measurements, then you can finally perform that step number 1, identify constraint. But how do you do this in practice? Well, because it is, as Al hinted, a systems thinking approach, so we take into consideration the whole system, that might be very hard to pull off because you need like the authority of the CEO to be able to act on the whole system. And that doesn't happen every day, that you're able to act from that viewpoint. So either you have the unconditional support of the CEO and you can act anywhere in the organization, because the constraint, the Herbie, can be anywhere in the organization, or you have to be, well, somehow expedient and find some other way to start. And what I typically do is that I do not start at the team level and I do not start at the management level, but I start with a vertical slice that goes from the CEO down to some team, probably a Herbie team, a constraint team, but it doesn't have to be. But what are we doing there? We are operating on one thing that certainly is a hidden, invisible potential constraint, and that is the flow of information, the vertical flow of information from the top to the bottom and back up. So all the actions of delegation, of assigning initiatives, projects, programs, tasks, whatever, to the organization, and conversely, the reporting, the escalation, calling the and-on cord, or pulling the and-on cord to have management attention. So that's where the team flow action typically starts, by exercising the vertical slice from top to bottom. And once you have that going in one slice, well, you have probably got the attention of someone high up in the company, possibly the CEO, and then you're there. You're where you wanted to be to really start. And that's when the fun begins.
Yeah, Steve, you hit on something, well, lots of things, but one in particular, right? Having the ability to work anywhere in the organization and needing something like the support or the empowerment through the CEO. And I think that's clearly another reason why we see a lot of these transformations that are so focused on IT, and they're oftentimes initiated through a PMO office, right? I mean, that's one of the areas that typically is starting some of this. And how much empowerment do they have outside of that, and how can we take a look at where we might be making some better improvements, or improvements in conjunction with just focusing on the team level. Yeah, definitely not something that's easy to do.
Yeah, I think that's very, very relevant. And even if you do that kind of action that I explained with the vertical slice, you still need to work with the teams. Let's not forget that.
Right.
Because if you want to collect metrics, well, metrics are collected on the ground. So it's the people doing the work that need to become aware of what are the metrics that matter. And here we have another problem which typically comes about as soon as you mention the word metrics. Why? Because numbers have been tools of abuse in the management. In the practices of, let's say, dysfunctional management. So there is a lot of resistance to the very notion of using metrics, but we must understand that there is another way of using metrics, which is not abusive, but which is there to help the entire organization. So in this quest of understanding from where to start, one thing that needs to be clarified from the beginning is, why are metrics necessary, and how are we going to actually use them? The purpose, from my perspective, is step one: identify the constraint. If you don't have metrics, you don't know where it is.
Yeah.
I've been reflecting on this conversation and the points we've been bringing up, and I want to make it clear another piece, because I don't know, I've been hearing some things kind of disturbing to me, because I've had very good success with systems thinking, and Dr. Ellie Goldbratz, the creator of Theory of Constraints, work that he writes in The Choice about inherent simplicity, and making it sound like systems thinking doesn't involve complexity. And I don't know where that comes from, because the Fifth Discipline, which is considered the iconic book on systems thinking, I think they mentioned complexity about 150 times, plus or minus 10. And in the Systems Bible, which is a great book, short book by the late John Gall, he mentions it like 50 times, and it's a short book. But so what we want to remember is systems thinking is about how things relate to each other. It's not the pieces. Systems thinking is not about decomposing into small pieces and then using the small pieces. In fact, it says if you do that and then optimize those small pieces, you're likely not to get global optimization. And that gives you a clue then that when you're using systems thinking in complex systems, that interaction is very, very important. So although we say sometimes let's look at the product management or look at management, it doesn't mean we don't also look at the development team, as Steve alluded that we have to improve them. But it's also usually a really good idea, and I say usually, I mean almost always. I can't recall any case where it wasn't true. If you look at what are the common cause of the errors of the teams. Now, they may not be causing those common causes, like being overworked by being organized improperly, but you can see why the teams are, in fact, jammed up. And if you notice what those things are, usually overworked, usually too big things coming in, things of that nature, and you see where those are originating from in the system, then you get a clue where you need to work. And so there are two pieces here. One is you see where's the origination of the fire. It's like there's this gas fire down at the valley because the fire pump is leaking and the fuel's going down, and everybody's looking down in the valley, but it's up at the top. So you can look to see where it appears the problem is, but then see what's causing that, and then see that interaction to see, one, how you can get to the root cause. And the second thing is there a better context, a better environment you can give the people doing the work? And just to wrap up, to make sure the dots are dotted, I guess T's crossed, is in the common case where people are working on too much and too many big things. And one of my favorite quotes, by the way, I maybe get this wrong, I may paraphrase it a little bit, but Goldratt once said, sometimes all it takes is working on smaller things to bring a system under control or out of chaos. Because it's so much easier to work on small things. They get done, you get your focus, you stop your multitasking, you cut out all these delays. So this idea of seeing the cause of the bottleneck is actually, and I know we're in a complex system, but I'll tell you, it's not that hard. There are so many things. I'll leave this was the last thing. I'll let you guys talk some more. Yes, in complex systems, you can't see everything, but I would suggest there's more mischief being caused by the things we can see but aren't paying attention to than the things we can't see. And I don't know why there's a resistance to being able to see all these things, like overwork hurts you, items too big hurt you, not having visibility hurts you, having improper value creation structure hurts you. These are almost, do this way, you'll get that way. Anyway, I'll leave it back to you.
One thing I'll add in is, what the outcomes that are being looked for, Steve, as you said, right? The zero step, identifying the goal, and again, a lot of times as organizations are going through these transformations, they're looking to have teams adopt an agile way of working, but they're still doing very large scopes of work, right? So they're still working on these projects that are funded on an annual basis, and that are just really significant. And there's a reluctance to do any work, to look at what we can do smaller. And now it looks like you were getting ready to chime in. Was there something?
No. I'd like to hear from both of you, and I'd be interested in Steve's view, because I said something I think is interesting, but I think it's also has a relationship to TOC. You might find that there's a constraint in one part of the value stream, but the cause of that constraint may be somewhere else. So I'd like to hear what Steve has to say about that assertion.
Well, the constraint can be anywhere, even outside of your organization. So that often comes as a surprise and an eye opener. And that's a perspective you must always keep in mind, that yes, you have your little system, so to say, your company, your organization, but that like circumscribed piece of reality interacts with what is outside, and what is outside can very well be the constraint. one for all regulations. They might put you in a situation that you would rather not be in, because they are limiting your ability to perform as you wish. But also the competition, the competitors, the pricing model or the business model, new business model creates a constraint for you. A new business model introduced by competition. But let's go back to the little reality of the company and reason about where could it be. Yes, it could be in terms of policies. It could be in terms of management attention. Management is so overloaded. Their Herbie backpack is so overloaded that they do not realize that they are making decisions which are counterproductive and that create that clogging of the system that I'll refer to. So in that case, apparently the constraint is some team that is not keeping up with the demand, but in reality, the constraint is management attention, or even more, I would say, the mental model that is driving managers to make such counterproductive decisions. And then, Al, you mentioned another thing which I want to go back to, because you mentioned the word common cause, and I have some, I would say, unconventional ideas on what common cause and special causes are in the knowledge work domain. So in the physical world, in manufacturing, common causes are so intrinsically tied to the process of production that you cannot almost detect them. They are part of the process, and special causes are outside. They are the Mr. Murphys that come about and disrupt your work. In manufacturing, you try to act on the special causes because they bring the production out of its bounds, out of its limits, and you want to prevent that. So that's where you have the statistical process control and so on. Let's focus on that second part, that common causes are part of the process. Now, what is the process of knowledge work? It's thinking. Who does the thinking? It's us, the people in the organization. So anything that can be done in terms of those decisions that I mentioned that maybe are dysfunctional are part of the process. And because we can act on them in knowledge work, while we cannot do it in manufacturing, in knowledge work, we have to find the common causes and act on those. Special causes come and go. It's the accident. Someday, you fall over, you trip over, and your leg is broken. Bad luck, but after a while, you're back again. That's not a common cause. You don't try to prevent that. But if you find the reason why some dysfunctional, behavior or decision is occurring and reoccurring over and over again, then you are acting on something powerful. So this is the conclusion. In knowledge work, you have to act and only act on common causes which are caused by your own thinking. And that is a major constraint.
I think I found a point of disagreement here, but it's not so much germane to knowledge work. In knowledge work, we're pretty much agreeing. I would say in manufacturing, there's an awful lot of work actually on the common cause. In fact, that's where a lot of the focus is, but they deal with special cause to kind of dampen the impact of it. And in fact, I would say in knowledge work, that's also worth knowing. And let me use requirements as an example. Getting requirements, or not getting them, you don't really gather them, but the interaction between those people who are in touch with the customer and, say, the development team. And very often, the way this is done is in a sense, a common cause, because it's not done very well at all. If you're not using acceptance test-driven development or some sort of super tight feedback loop, you don't have a very good system. And you could, in that sense, say, well, you're going to have a common cause, because the common cause is you don't have good communication. I don't remember who said this, but the best quote I heard about communication is, the biggest problem with communication is the belief it happened. We don't communicate very well. The reason face-to-face or interactions like this are good is we can immediately discover something's wrong. So a way to change a system in knowledge work is to have like test first, get an doesn't have to be test like a software, but get an understanding of what's there. But no matter how well you do with eliminating common causes, there's always the potential of a special cause taking place. And this is one of the big problems we have in any kind of work. I think worse in knowledge work, because in knowledge work, it's not obvious. If you're building a pyramid upside down or as a big cube instead of a pyramid, you notice it because it's physical. In the software or knowledge work, you don't notice it. So it's very imperative that we use feedback loops. So there's the detection of the error can be very useful. And in knowledge work, this is something, or software anyway, it's something that can be done a lot. This is why I also believe smaller is better. You get the feedback naturally. But if your feedback is taking you more literally than a few hours, then you may not be going small enough. I don't mean you get something out the door every few hours. I'm one of the first people who said saying you can get a release in 2 weeks is absurd. You can't get a flight control system to work in 2 weeks, and you can't say, well, we'll get it to turn left this sprint, we'll get it to turn right the next sprint, and do releases of a plane. But there is this issue of there is this difference between how do you eliminate errors, or at least manage them? How do you detect them when they occur so they don't get bigger? So a little thing doesn't become a huge thing. So I'll throw that out to you too. I've talked a bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we're not detecting the errors in knowledge work quick enough and spotting and doing something about it, they can propagate a lot easier in knowledge work than they can in the physical world as well, right? So I mean, that's something that being attuned with, and I'd say, as far as the quick feedback loops and how soon we can get something to act on, and I would say, just in my experience with working with organizations, sometimes it's also based on just the progress or the maturity of the team or the organization. I mean, sometimes it's a huge step just to be getting something in front of people within a 2-week period, right? Let alone an hourly period. So I think that's something else that is just part of sort of that transformation roadmap, and understanding that we need to be making progress and we need to be seeing it, and then not getting complacent with, we're getting regular attendance at at an iteration review or something at some cadence if we're using a lean approach. But we're seeing that, we want even quicker and quicker feedback, and we want to be able to act on that even quicker and quicker. So I think it just depends.
I want to hear what Steve says, but I just had something I want to clarify. There's feedback like I've completed a story, or there's feedback like we've got a feature, or feedback like we've released something. I wasn't talking about that kind of feedback.
Yeah, you're talking about feedback of seeing or interacting with something, right? To get feedback. That
feedback is often just me in the system. I do something and I see, gee, is this going the way I think it should be going? Too often we have our heads down and we waste hours and hours. I remember when I was first developing, the first 10 years of my development, I was kind of a lone wolf. Not the first 10 years, first 7 or 8 years. But then after about 10 years, and I was working in some other projects, and I had some people around me who were pretty sharp and would basically tell me what I was doing wrong. What I noticed, I started becoming a little more self-aware. And what I noticed was very often I would get my heads down and just keep bashing away at something for hours and hours, even days. And what I learned after a while, it didn't take that long once I noticed it. Once I noticed these rat holes I was going down, I said, Al, what you need to notice is not how deep you are in the rat hole, but when you get into the rat hole. And I started discovering that there's a different way of how I'm focusing on things the moment I enter one. I get very focused, very heads down, stop questioning if what I'm doing is the right thing. And I can spend days down there. It's kind of, heroic, not really, but so that kind of thing is the feedback. I mean, this is why I think in some ways there's some opportunities in this virtual world we now, because of the pandemic, where we can't get together and we're forced to make, I have faster feedback loops now because I have 4 or 5 people I can just ping on Teams and say, hey, do you have a chance to talk? And one of them can talk to me. It's not always has to be the same person. So there are ways you can create this kind of feedback.
I'm glad you clarified that, because I definitely didn't think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, I didn't mean that. It's just I realized I'd left that out. Now, if you're working on something with just a couple of people and it's a small team, you actually can. I mean, I've seen some XP people, man, the thin slices they do is unbelievable. But to be candid, I'm not that thin a slice person. But there are a lot of XP people I know who literally they slice super thin. I'm not that. I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're probably not entirely in disagreement, Al, but I think we are talking about two distinct things, and one is the feedback that you get from what I call the resistance of the medium. I had a blog post, a very early blog post that was called like "Friction is Feedback." Because all the things that are annoying, like that compiler bug that or compiler error message that always comes up and reminds you to put in the semicolon and you never learn it. Well, that is a kind of feedback that the stuff you're doing is giving you. I say it's like the sculptor who is banging on a piece of rock, and the resistance that he's feeling at every bang shapes not only the rock, but shapes his way of proceeding. So it's one kind of feedback that comes from the stuff you're doing. The other feedback is much more subtle, because it comes from the surrounding environment. Here I always make the distinction. You might have heard of my metaphor of the jungle, the jeep, and the journey, which makes a clear distinction of what is the way of working, which I know is an expression you like, Al, in DA, the way of working, and the stuff that comes towards you, the jungle, the work. They are sources of different kinds of variations and different kinds of feedback. The way of working is very stable. It's very regular. Just take the act of writing a line of code and either running it or compiling it. It's almost mechanical. And if you observe what is happening, it's always the same thing. You either are happy or you're not, and you repeat. So that is a process that can be subject to deeper analysis for common cause variation. But the stuff that comes against you, well, that's where you have an army of Mr. Murphys hiding and assaulting you. And they will not warn you. So when the problem has happened, it might be too late. And then you have like chain reactions of that stuff. So what do? Well, you need to have a system in place where you can have early leading signals of incoming negative variability. And this is something you can do, not at the single, you can do it partially at the single team level, but especially when you have tens and tens of teams. And you might have the Herbie team, which is the weakest team, the one that you need really to help. But some other team, which is performing well, is facing something that is coming towards it that will make it have problems. And that's the kind of thing that you can detect with early signals. So it's an anticipation of the feedback loops before they are like too bad. And again, to get there, to do that, you need to apply proper metrics. You need to be able to detect if a team is slowing down and realize is it slowing down because the process they are using is having some problem, or is it slowing down because the terrain is becoming more difficult? It's starting to go uphill and there are rocks and roots, and it's more difficult to proceed. Those are two very distinct situations and need different kind of feedback loops.
So, Al, I've got a question for you because I know this is something that has been being worked on. To go back to just maybe the transformation roadmaps themselves, or the approach to starting or pivoting a existing transformation. So I know you've been doing some work on creating a roadmap and different options and things to consider. Anything you can share there?
Yeah, I think I can. First of all, we kind of call it a roadmap. Well, I guess it means, I actually have to ask you what you mean by the roadmap, because we've used that term in two different ways. One is a roadmap by what's the process you go through to discover kind of what you need to do, kind of like as a consultant goes in, kind of follows a certain pattern. And then there's the term roadmap has been used that says, oh, now you figured out what you're going to do to improve. These are the steps the organization does. And that latter one, I actually don't call a roadmap, except sometimes because people expect to hear it. I like to call those an improvement backlog. The idea of you've got a set of options you might do, but you select a few, like following theory of constraints, you'd work on those things that relate to the constraint. And after you've worked on those, the next step may not be what you thought it would be. It might be something different, because I do believe we can often predict next steps reasonably accurately. And then when we don't, we actually see what we need to learn. So emergence is necessary, and feedback is necessary, but it's not like a roadmap implies there's this map, this terrain you're traversing that's somewhat stable, which of course it isn't, because the world's changing. So tell me which of those two you mean, like a roadmap, like a consultant would follow these steps to discover, or a roadmap a company would follow, that first one?
It's the latter, just because that there is a lot of prevalence out in the marketplace, right? Where these roadmaps that paint a picture of, if you do this and if you follow this map through this terrain that is stable, you're going to be able to get certain benefits or outcomes. And rarely is that the case.
Okay, well, I think that's not going to work very often. And it's not going to work very often, ironically, for the reason they're so popular. I know doesn't that sound weird, but it's true. Yeah. So the reason they don't work so well is we're in a complex system. Things are interacting with each other. Systems are not made of the decomposition. It's the relationships between things. If you search for what if Russ Akoff did a TED Talk, brilliant 12 minutes, and he talks about how systems are more about the relationships between things. So as you're improving things, you're not improving them individually. Very rare, I don't know, rare. Not very often does a local improvement without any attention to the whole system actually result in a whole system improvement. You might get lucky, but that'd be what it is. So as you go forward in complex systems like this, although you can make reasonably good predictions at the constraint level what you need to be doing, and I say that based on basically 16 years of experience where we've done that. We've done that in cases where nobody had done what we said would work, and then it did. It worked. In fact, the only time it actually seemed to fail, when I look back on this history, is people reacted sometimes to it differently. In other words, we knew what needed to happen. I'd say you almost can always figure that out. Not always, but very often. But some of the complexity is how people are going to react to it. So you do it, you see how they react, and you just learn something. So this is the idea. You move forward where you can, and you learn as a result when that's wrong. This is something Dr. Goldratt talks a lot about in The Choice. You don't get distressed by it. It's just part of the natural phenomenon. But the Agile community has somewhat, mostly, I'm thinking of the word like thrown off, not agreed to that. We're really, in my mind, we're in an engineering discipline. Now, engineering is misunderstood. So this opens up a whole can of worms. So maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. I'm not talking about engineering like building a bridge over an interstate that's been done a million times. That's just construction, manufacturing outside. That's not engineering. Engineering is when you have principles and laws, and you're trying to create something that hasn't been done before. And sometimes engineering is half art and half science. True engineering is very complex. And we haven't acknowledged certain things we could look at and that they're important. We haven't acknowledged the theory of constraints method as being an effective way of doing it. So a lot of people just throw up their hands and say, oh, it's complex, we don't know what to do. So give me something that'll be a solution some of the times. So that's the irony. That's the non sequitur, is that we don't acknowledge some of the things that are there. So we end up being ineffective, and then we use complexity, as it's sometimes stated, as non-predictable and all this, and we don't know what's going on, as, oh my God, I'm in such a bizarre place where I can't figure things out. Give me a solution, please, because that's my only hope. And we throw out the potential that, maybe we're smart enough to see the patterns of this for years and years. And what's funny is I get a lot of flack for saying stuff like this. And if I had never done it before, maybe that would be justified. But I got case after case after case. I'm not talking about me. I've done this a few times. I've seen a lot of people go into places and try something that had never been done before based on basic principles of lean and flow and theory of constraint, and do something that had never been done before and be successful almost all the time when they did it, because they had the agreement of the people around them and they knew the right thing to do. So that's another distinction we need to make. What is it you need to do, and what is it can you get done? Those are two different things.
Right. Yeah.
So, Al, you maybe unknowingly, but you just described an evaporating cloud, because on the one side, people want to have the certainty of a nice roadmap, and on the other side, they roll their eyes. Oh, we are in this complexity, and nothing can be controlled or predicted. So you cannot have it both ways. You cannot have a roadmap, which is a sort of prediction, and then on the other side, roll your eyes, say we can't do anything about it. Something is not quite right. So what are those assumptions that people have in one case and the other? And for me, that goes back to that metaphor of the jungle and the jeep. Where are you? No, you cannot apply the notion of, say, inherent simplicity to the jungle, because there is no simplicity at all there. But in your process, yes, that's where you've chased the constraint. But you must be aware that the jungle, where you have the rolling eyes because you don't know what you're facing next, is what will impact the jeep in its trajectory. So with the clarity of thinking that TOC brings about, you're also able to detect these intrinsic contradictions of opposing beliefs that people typically hold at the same time, without realizing that they are the cause of that contradiction. And oftentimes, this huge complexity that is being claimed is really a matter of perception, and it is very often self-inflicted. This doesn't mean that complexity does not exist. I just stated seconds ago that the jungle is there. You cannot avoid it. You have to go through it. But within the realm of your work, remember the common causes where the process is your thinking. Well, you decide what thoughts to have, not the jungle. So you are in charge of that. And therefore, go back to the root of this, the mental models. What are the mental models that are guiding your decisions?
Yeah. I'll let you go first, Joshua, because otherwise I got about a 5-minute response to what Steve said. Not in agreement, not in disagreement.
Well, why don't you go ahead, because then we'll probably be pretty close to our time, and we can kind of give our last part.
Okay. Well, when I got out of university in 77, I went to work at IBM, and for about 6 months, I don't know, I was doing interesting things. But then I got on this really amazing project, and I'm going to make some claims about what we did on the project. That's not my claim. I was the grunt Fortran programmer. I had a master's, but that didn't really mean much. I just wrote what I was told to write. And what we were working on was one of the first microprocessor chips that was built up by substrate, where you actually had, there are many layers to it, the transistors, and this one, to keep costs down, they build the first, half dozen levels, and then we would put the metal on top to connect the transistors together. And there was something like, if I remember right, 3,200 transistors on the chip, and they suggested never do more than 1,800. And we had something like 2,500. We had a number that was so astronomically high, it was said it's impossible to fix the chip. And the reason was they couldn't split the chip up into two chips as they normally would. because the card was full and they couldn't have two cards because the board was full. This turned out to be we didn't know it. We called it the Pacific IO controller. We didn't know what Pacific was. Turned out it was the System 38. And my group, or the group I was part of, I basically saved that project. That's a big project for General Systems Division. So there was a lot of pressure. The guy who was the brilliant guy was the person at IBM Research. I was just the grunt programmer. But what was really staggering about that was everybody thought the problem was to shorten the wires. Less wires, more space, things like that. That was wrong. Because what you did is you put all the wires that were all the transistors that were next to each other in a big lump. And what this guy knew is, no, you got to spread them out, actually, so you have more options. Because you don't care if the wires, well, I mean, you're talking about a chip this big. You don't care if it's an inch or half an inch. You just want them connected. And what everybody did was, we called it a constrained start, the way you normally did it. So this guy was smart enough to know what to look at. And then we did something that, when I look back on it, was basically a precursor to neural nets. This guy, like I said, he was just off the wall genius. But there were two things about this. Why I love your jungle metaphor, that's what he would say. He would say, yes. We did this, took a few months. We used a 360 computer, 370, whatever it was at the time. We came in at night, 6 at evening to 6 in the morning, blasted that thing about 80% use. And people say, well, you can never build chips this way at IBM. I said, well, no. What we're doing is we're in the jungle now. And we got our machetes out. And we're figuring out how to do this. We're breaking the rules of what's known, but we're figuring out. When we're done, we're going to build an airport. People will just come in. So this way you look at the problem is essential. And one of the things Goldratt says in The Choice that I like a lot is, he says, the problem with thinking systems are complex is then you look for complex solutions, when in fact you need simple solutions in complex problems. And the thing I like about what you said about the evaporating cloud, which I haven't studied, but I'm not surprised I was regurgitating it, so to speak, because I've studied Goldratt and his thinking, and it seems rational that I would come up with that. What we have to remember or believe, you can believe it or not believe it, I have no proof, but I like how he talks about Newton saying the world is amazingly harmonious. And when you have conflicts, it's not just that the conflicts, I agree with you, it's not just that the conflicts are the kind of the cause of these issues, but if you believe in harmony and you see conflict, then what you want to know is that there's a resolution to the conflict. And if you look for the resolution to the conflict, you'll see the world in a different way. And I've seen this over and over and over and over again. There are many thought leaders I've talked to that would say things that I knew contradicted my belief system, but I had evidence mine was right. But they're pretty smart people. You don't just discount really smart people. And it sometimes would take a day, sometimes it would take weeks to reconcile. So that's a piece of advice I would suggest to the audience. Conflict is feedback that you're thinking about the problem the wrong way. And you can resolve the conflict instead of compromising on the conflict. I have yet to see conflict. I'm talking in the knowledge work area, okay? I'm not going to get into world politics or things, although I think there's some parallels as well. But that's a key piece, is how do you resolve this? And to notice that conflict, I'm going to say it again, conflict is a symptom of posing the wrong problem to solve. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I think it's partially posing the wrong problem, as you said, but more likely starting the analysis with different assumptions. Because in the evaporating cloud technique, to resolve that conflict, what you are trying to uncover are the unstated assumptions that the opposing views are holding. So if you can uncover all those assumptions, typically there is some assumption that when verbalized, you realize that either it's not true or it can be replaced with another more powerful assumption, typically it's called an injection, which will take care of that conflict. And all of a sudden, the one side and the other side are on the same page, and the conflict is no longer there. That's why it's called like the evaporating cloud. So yes, it could be that you're addressing the wrong problem, but typically because you are in the same company, you're living the same reality, you will be addressing the same problem, but you're looking at it differently because you're having different assumptions.
Yeah, and I'll my wrap up will be I have this picture of somebody that is, you know, standing on top of a map, right? That they're just they're in it. They're not seeing anything beyond it. They're not sure if they should be doing anything. So Steve, I think in some of the posts you've made, it's, you know, being outside of the box, and I'll say, you know, step off of the map and just be open to some of the other options that are there and some of the other ways we can create that improvement backlog, or, you know, create where we might actually get some better progress than the typical approach.
Yes. So I think we've reached the time limit. Therefore, I say, no. Goodbye, everyone. Do not leave Herbie alone in the jungle.
And before we wrap up for today, I do want to say, Steve, since you do have a lot of information on TameFlow, books, training, and everything, if you want to take just 30 seconds and say that, then I'll talk a little bit about some of the DA training that we've got. But yeah, why don't you take a moment and share some of that?
Well, you know, I'm writing or rewriting a book which I hope will be the reference for all TameFlow. It's called The Book of TameFlow, and it's currently available as a pre-release on LeanPub. So just go to leanpub.com/TameFlow, and you can get it for an early bird pricing.
Awesome. And yeah, I'll say, you know, we talk about or a lot of the things that we talk about in these sessions, you know, to go to start somewhere or to expand maybe what you do know. Yeah, take a look at all of the courses that we have. We do a lot of the disciplined Agile training. We have got Agile and Lean Bootcamp. So between the TameFlow website and the Process Mentors website, yeah, we might be able to help you out. And with that, I'll say, hope to see everyone next week. And
isn't it 2 weeks? I thought we were scheduled it to skip next week.
You know what? We'll put something out on LinkedIn by the end of the day. Let's talk about what we might
that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, next time. Let's just say next time.
Say next time. Good point, Al. All right. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.